All right. Well, welcome. Today is October 16th, 2024, and we are in the end stretch of our webinar series. And today I'm excited to talk about our current panel today, which is going to be executive coaching and how to be a better leader. And we've put together a great panel. Give me just a moment here. There we go. So I'm joined today with Ari DeGroat, the coach at Upward and Inward. We've also got Diana Stepner from Product Gold and Monica Smith from Monica Smith Coaching. And if you go on and reach out to any of these folks afterwards, just reach out and we'll be happy to connect you. As a reminder, I'm your host, Jim West. I'm the Associate Director at BioTools Innovator, and this is an hour and a half format. We do an hour live stream, and then we reserve 30 minutes as a private Q&A with our cohort. And this is the first time we've done this topic, so I'm really excited to jump into it. So let's kick it off. And Ari, if you could introduce yourself to the group.
Yes, and I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation on such a great panel. So yes, Ari DeGroat, I'm with Upward and Inward. A little bit of background. I studied organizational leadership, and the first chunk of my career was doing the human side of change management under the HR umbrella for about 8 years. And then the last 12 years, I found the startup ecosystem and worked within a corporate innovation environment, running an accelerator and doing programs. And within there, I developed a leadership growth program for founders, looking at the whole founder, offering coaching. And so somewhat recently, I went out on my own to develop, kind of merge these worlds, to do Upward and Inward. And through this work, I'm working with impact leaders on an individual and team level to really reattach to purpose, work with other humans, and then build out into the human-centered systems thinking. So for me, a lot of the purpose of a coach is adding that reflection. We all need a mirror, and this is it's an iterative, persistent process. And so I'll pause there because I know we'll go deeper into that, but I just wanted to give you a hint of how I look at coaching.
Yeah, and Eric, and you kind of mentioned it, but you were running the Sprint T-Mobile Accelerator for a number of years too, right? So you saw a lot of entrepreneurs coming through.
Yes. Yes. And yeah, for about a little over 9 years. And so worked with hundreds of founders as very early stage and then scaling high growth founders. So I've seen behind the curtains and what can go on in your head and heart.
Awesome, thank you. Diana, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Diana Stepner, and I'm in San Francisco. And similar to what was just shared, thank you. I'm looking forward to the conversations and being able to connect with people afterwards. My background's in product leadership and product management. I led global product teams for about 20 years. Throughout, I did coaching just of my team members, to help them grow and nudge out of their comfort zones. And I just found over time that I really loved that people aspect, being able to help people stretch and grow. And so earlier this year, I decided to focus on coaching full time. And it's amazing. I just keep learning, keep meeting incredible people, and keep giving, having the opportunity to give back like we're doing today. So I love this. I love this focus on coaching because I think it's so important. It's often something that we believe only a certain, level of individuals can have access to, but I think coaching should be and can be available to everybody.
Right. And Monica, tell us about yourself.
Well, first of all, thank you, Jim, so much. It was so good to see you in Nashville just recently, and so I was really excited to join you on the panel. Anything that I'm talking about today, I will have I have a LinkedIn page, Monica Smith Coaching. It's a LinkedIn page that will have articles about any of the things that we've talked about because I'm kind of a research girl. So my history is started in academe and really developing emotional intelligence programs for colleges, for universities, and have always kind of leaned more toward the positive psychology of let's really work with self-awareness to do self-management from that perspective. But I have always felt blessed to be able to have the master's in counseling because when we come to places in people's stories or the roots that are impacting their leaves or present day scenarios, it's always nice to be able to draw from the therapies and the research for some of those tools. So I really enjoy doing that with my clients. And my career has been so fulfilling. I feel like coaching picked me. I didn't pick coaching. It was kind of one of those things. I was invited to a retreat in New Hampshire at a lake that I still cannot pronounce. And I got introduced to this concept of my love of story and helping people really see themselves through their story and learn to manage areas that they weren't aware of, how that coupled with emotional intelligence and ended up having a really transferable ROI for leaders of all sizes, small or large, right? So I work with C-suite executives, I work with entrepreneurs, I work with I even have an Olympic coach that I work with, which is great. So all diverse types of clients. And I really enjoy that. One of the things I just wanted to point out, and I don't know if this will be a segue, Jim, but the origin of coaching, whenever I really was doing a deep dive into the origin, I looked at the first book that really came out describing this type of coaching was the Inner Game of Tennis in 1974. So that was my birth year. So it was kind of fun that that came out around that same time. And the idea, this defining thing of coaching, or this to define coaching, is to transport someone from one place to another. So if I could say what coaching has been for me, has been I've had my own transformative journey from feeling fragile or internally weak to taking back my power and become internally stronger and being able to become my strongest self. So I feel like as a coach, it looks like different things with different clients, but I help transport them from something that they're feeling fragile or weak in and helping them to have inner strength and to not be so impacted by external circumstances. So that's kind of my spiel. I guess it turned into a sales spiel all of a sudden, but
No, that's great. Thanks, Monica. And I think what I'm excited about is each of you have come to a similar place, coaching, but you've come from completely different angles and completely different backgrounds. And so I'm looking forward to diving into kind of the differences that we see here. So I guess, Diana, maybe you could kick us off here. How do you define executive coaching?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because there's so many different ways that people perceive the word executive. And so I also like to talk about it from the perspective of not just one avenue, but multiple avenues. And so what I mean is that executive coaching typically focuses on high-level leaders. And so it could be the C-suite, it could be VPs, but the whole focus is on enhancing their skills and their leadership effectiveness. And so that will vary person to person because you want to be able to build up specific competencies. You want to be able to narrow in and help them be able to improve their decision making. And the other facets that often get overlooked is those soft skills. And so executive coaching will also help individuals really tune into their self-awareness, how they're impacting those around them, and ways that they can improve not just themselves, but have that ripple effect that also makes their company and their employees stronger too.
Awesome. Monica or Ari, anything to add?
Yeah, I think something about coaching in general, whether it's executive leadership, it's really being seen and supported. And so in your growth journey, so I think of it as constructive growth, and there's like this foundational level, and then the coaching helps to build the scaffolding that you build the rest of your performance and hopefully fulfillment around. And the other thing, like it's really engaging. So the client needs to show up fully, engage in your growth. And it's more like planting a flag. It's directional, not directive. So it's not like someone giving you advice. It's more like jumping in with you and helping you find your own authentic way forward in leadership and being human, as you're growing.
Yeah, I'd also like to add I love the shift that has happened in coaching. So executive coaching kind of took off in the 80s, but then in the 90s, we start to see this big shift of going from um, where a coach was to help mitigate a weakness in an employee or on a team. And now it's shifted to really support and highlighting strengths and that goal orientation, right? And I love that shift. I love the strength finder shift and all of those things because for me, what coaching looks like is this concept of I help people identify the personality, which is your preference, things you were just born with. Like when you cross your arms, one way is way more comfortable than the other. You just have a natural preference. So it's personality plus your experiences equals how you show up, right? So when I look at coaching from that perspective, it's like really getting to dive into a person's make and model and helping them to, like you said, coming alongside and helping them discover what are their features? What is their form? What are they wanting out of their own life? Because, we're not just handing them a textbook and saying, here you go, here's your textbook, and you just follow these 7 steps. We're actually coming alongside and helping them to recognize what are some of their preferences, what are some of the experiences that they've had, and how are they showing up right now? And do they like how they're showing up? Is that how they want to continue to show up? So, some food for thought.
Yeah. So I guess Monica, in terms of like a company, an entrepreneur sort of thinking about coaching, what are kind of benefits or what are the benefits the entrepreneur should be thinking about in terms of like why are they engaging? What are they hoping to get out of it? What kind of problems are they trying to solve?
Yeah. Well, first of all, a cool thing that the Coaching Federation came out with was that the ROI financially for all businesses is a 700% return. Like that's crazy. I don't know exactly how they've specified that or clarified that, but just the idea that it's so robust that you can get benefits out of it. I look at all of the people that I work with as no matter what company you're part of, especially as an entrepreneur or startup, though, you are the product. So when you're investing in yourself as part of the product, right? You are, I mean, especially with all the stress that's going on, to be able to invest in being supported so you're not stuck in your limbic system and not being able to get to that prefrontal cortex of decision making, right? How much time is wasted in a trauma response of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn? So, I mean, I could go down that rabbit hole forever. And then not to mention, we don't know what we don't know. I've got lots of executives that say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so frustrated because people don't respond to me the way that I'm seeing myself. Like, where is this barrier in communication?" And so sometimes giving them that 360 view of how are the people around you seeing you and how can I help you bridge that communication to be more seen and heard? And then just in their own personal life struggles, like you cannot extract that everybody brings themselves and their home to work. You just can't. So helping to manage and give tools to put those in places where they're more manageable. All of those things are so important. So on the whole, I think the benefit, we know that there's tons of research that you could just Google the benefits of coaching and you would see an array of psychological benefits and financial benefits, but I'll let somebody else add to that.
Yeah. I guess, Diane, I want to build on that. So, in addition to the benefits, what are the styles and approach that you have in bringing as an executive coach?
Yeah, and I think that again is one of the things that's amazing about coaching is exactly as Monica just said, we show up as ourselves. And so a lot of coaching is being able to determine what is the authentic version of the person we're speaking with. Because often with executives, they have this persona that may be real or created. And oftentimes that can positively, but also negatively impact their culture. And so I think for us, we need to be able to show up in a way that helps the person that we're coaching. And that means different conversation approaches. It may be certain people like videos. It may be that certain people like to go through worksheets. It may be certain people just want to brainstorm back and forth. And so there isn't one definition of how to show up as a coach. I think you need to ensure you're being authentic, but also showing up in a way that aligns with the person you're partnering with. And so getting to know them too.
Awesome. Ari, what questions should a company be asking when thinking about engaging with an executive coach?
Such a good question. I think it's really important to get clear about why coaching, why now? What are you actually looking for? Is it personal growth? Is it growth in your culture? Like what's bringing you into the process and finding that coach that can match that? Logistical things like what is the cadence? What is the expectation? I think a really smart thing to ask is what should I be doing between sessions? Because that's where you're living and leading, right? So you do deep work, you uncover things, you set goals, and I like to look at it from it's iteration. You set up experiments, and then you go test, and then you bring it back for feedback with the coach. And so like finding out how that coach works with you to structure that, to test that, to add accountability and follow up with you when you meet the next time is really important. How do you measure growth? Like, how do you check in with me as a client to let me know, like, what is your style if I feel like we're off track? How do we communicate to each other where I can realign this coaching process? Because ultimately the coach is there to help you achieve your goals. And we come at it from such different perspectives. I've leveraged coaches personally, and I find that different challenges, different seasons of my life call for different types of coaches too. So trying to get clarity yourself before you go in is really helpful. And then really finding out, like, there's also just the personality fit. And some coaches are more directive. And if you're craving like business advice, get really clear about that. But if you want to find your own internal answers and pave your path that way, I think that's more where I personally lean. And of course, I have knowledge that I would share with permission, but I'm not throwing that at people. I want it to be authentically theirs and for them to find that. So powerful questions, presence-based coaching, things like that. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah. Well, I guess, to take it to the next level, when should a company or a founder think about engaging with a coach? When's the right time?
I think all of us would probably answer, as soon as possible. And it's not from the perspective of we're coaches, but that as an executive, it can be lonely and it can be a situation that is new or is changing. And so having someone that you can talk to transparently, authentically, open is extremely important. It helps you realize how others may see you. It helps you realize more about yourself. And as we've highlighted already, it also will help you balance because oftentimes when you're in that C-suite, that founder mode, you forget the rest of your life. And so having a coach helps you create that balance so you can show up for the people who work with you, but you can also be there for others in your life. So I don't think there's ever a too early time to start working with a coach, just to be able to help evolve who you are. And that can help the company that you're running or founding because it will continue to evolve too.
Yeah. Well, and to add to that, the greatest population right now for the divorce rate, the highest divorce rate is with entrepreneurs in America. So, that just shows how the stress that a company or this type of work can have on a family can be pretty catastrophic. So having somebody to come alongside, if that's an area of focus for you that you're needing some support. Now, back to what Diana and Ari are both saying, which is great, is it's assessing, and I love to start with a discovery session. So whenever I'm onboarding, I do a discovery session to kind of see what they need and where they are. And then I've got this robust group of people I trust to say, throughout this discovery session, I see that you're actually more of a fit for Diana, or you're more of a fit for Ari, or Ari. So, it's like, it's interesting how understanding that the desire for where's that person wanting to go from here to here, that's what we have to be able to be on point with and understand and see and recognize, so that we can either provide the right resource or become the right resource.
Can I add one caveat? Because I agree with everything you're both saying, but to anyone looking at like when is the right time, I think you have to be real, like you have to be radically committed to growth. Whether that's your own personal growth or growth as a company, because it is an engagement. We recognize you're investing time, you're investing money. So making that worth your while and getting really clear about like why now, is really helpful, and that will change over time for that growth.
Yeah, well, Ari, to pick up on that, what you've talked to a lot of companies, you've seen a lot of founders, you've probably seen good leaders, bad leaders, all that over the years. What are the core fundamentals of effective leadership in your opinion?
I have seen a lot. I think so. The best leaders are doing this kind of unseen inner work. They're doing that whole, it's like the iceberg beneath the surface, right? And you're doing it at all times. And then they are able to somehow shift and not be self-centered, but look outward. A personal model that I use is with the name upward, your highest aspirations; inward, you're looking at your shine, your shadow, your strengths, your weaknesses, your values, getting really clear. So upward, inward, then outward. So that's where you're testing. You're looking at bringing other people into the process, and then forward. And that's the triple loop learning. That's the iteration and growth and adapting to what reality is calling for. So when it comes to leadership, it's somebody who is able to adapt, to read the room, but they're anchored solidly in who they are while they continue to grow. So they're not managing self and ego. They're really like purpose focused, and they're engaging in collaboration. They're open to shifting, here, bringing really like proactively seeking other people on their team, their voices, and bringing that into the solution so it can be co-created. So the leaders are not the ones with the authority title. They're leading from inspiration and influence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the focus on soft skills, because oftentimes they're overlooked, especially, coming from a technology background. It is, or it used to be, how technical are you? All of those facets would make you, quote, a leader. But I think exactly as we're highlighting in these, conversations, those soft skills are the differentiator. And they're often the things that get overlooked. And through coaching, through self-awareness, you begin to realize anything you say, anything you do as a leader has a ripple effect on your company, your team, your reports. And it's those soft skills that really can tune up a person's commitment or tune down someone's motivation. And so being able to focus on those soft skills can really be a differentiator for an executive.
Yeah.
Monica, can you train the soft skills that make leaders great?
Yes, yeah. I want to add just a little bit to
Okay.
this other, if that's okay, and then I'll definitely talk about soft skills. Peter Drucker would tell us that leadership isn't characteristics, it's results, which I think is kind of an interesting phenomenon. But it's also about, there's so many different leadership philosophies and styles, with like authoritarian, there's transactional, there's servant leadership, all these different. And I think when a leader is authentically living in alignment or congruency with their leadership style, and they're able to respect their manager's leadership styles, I do think those are discussions that really keep that forward momentum, where culture doesn't eat strategy for breakfast. Another Drucker. I'm a huge Drucker fan. But so I think that's something that's important. Now back to soft skills, which is I love, love, love Daniel Goleman and I love Bradbury and all these guys that are talking about emotional intelligence and how IQ is static, so it's pretty fixed. But emotional intelligence or EQ is not fixed. It is very much learned behaviors. The more that we go from self-awareness to learning how to manage ourselves and social awareness to learning how to manage relationships, the more equipped we are to be able to lead from a place of wholeness and authenticity and having the tools to engage in a way that has, if we have self-respect, self-representation, and self-protection, then we can offer that to our teams or those people that we work with. So kind of a long answer, but yes.
Okay, thank you. So Ari, how do you develop these skills? How do you put them into practice? How do you get better at being a leader?
Absolutely. So, there are for me, and I know a lot of other coaches, like I've always leveraged a couple assessments. I have a love-hate relationship with assessments because ultimately you're the expert on you. But what it provides is this kind of objective, it's a Trojan horse to have a deeper conversation. And I think it's really interesting to look at some of those results and notice where you find friction. And that's often a clue to look there. Because there's something you've had feedback or you have some kind of imposter syndrome around. So you kind of have a hunch of where you need to grow. And so getting really clear about that. And sometimes it's strategic too. You don't have to like shore up all weaknesses. You can bring on people to the team to help round out the leadership. But it truly is about, I mean, this is a whole group of mostly entrepreneurs. Being iterative and testing and putting out a hypothesis and like, okay, what's the MVP version of me testing this skill? Who could I talk to next? What does that look like? You can even role play with your coach ahead of time, like how that conversation could go, and then test it in the real world and then get feedback from those individuals, get feedback from the coach. And all the while you're developing that kind of internal sensor to know when you're on point, when you're out of alignment, out of integrity, when you're, and then it's like, okay, let me work on that part. So it's just this continuous growth process, but really being clear about what are the ideas and the areas I want to focus on. And then what does that look like in behaviors that I can actually go do? What are the actions?
That's great.
Yeah.
Monica, do you have anything to add?
Um, yeah, first of all, that is so true. I mean, when I think of the integrity gap, it's like when your expectations are here and your reality is here, you're filling that with anxiety or depression, right? So we have to learn to bring our expectations and our reality to a little bit more in alignment so that we don't have all that internal friction and all of that angst, and then we can really walk out our make and model. And so yeah, I love anything that gets us more congruent, more honest, more in alignment with ourselves, because we give from our overflow is what I've experienced, especially with my clients, is the more that they have built from within, the more that and the characteristics and the traits that they're wanting to give, they've explored them and they've adopted them for themselves first.
Oh, good, Dana.
Oh no, I love the framing of it because again, as executives, you are defining the culture. You're influencing the culture 100%. And the assessments help to bring out the qualities in you that, yes, you may be aware of, but also there may be some new learnings. And, similar to what Ari said, it's like I have, love-hate with assessments, but the piece that I really find valuable is when you learn the impact your strengths or your weaknesses have on others. And that's often something that's overlooked. And so another way that, we try to gather that feedback beyond the assessments is, the 360s, because that opportunity to provide feedback directly on a person who's leading the organization is rare. But as there's someone you're giving, your heart and your soul to, hopefully there's a way for them to be more in tuned with the impact that they're having on their team and consequently on themselves and what they can achieve. And so being able to pull together, that self insight, that assessment insight, and the insight from the ones around us, create a deeper and more impactful vision and view of who you really are and what that can be doing to your team and your company.
Which, Jim, we talked about adding some stories.
Mhm.
So I kind of have a story to illustrate Diana's point, if that's all right. So the story is I have a C-suite executive that he's a wonderful human, and his team gifted him with coaching. So he didn't know that he really wanted to do this coaching, but he was gifted with it. So he said, pretty much, I think my team doesn't like me. And so as we were unfolding and getting his story, it became very apparent that this client has been over responsible from the time he's young, right? So he's had all this pressure of being over responsible for adults in his life as a kid and then in college for roommates and so on and so on. Well, he had learned to use anger as a boundary. He didn't know how to have boundaries, so he was using anger. So his team was not hearing him in what he was trying to say, which he had wonderful, valid points and things that he wanted to say because all they were hearing and seeing was his anger. And so everyone was either avoiding him or, not inviting him to things that he needed to be invited to. So it was so fun to watch that transformation when he learned to have boundaries in other ways. So kind of what we're talking about here is having those assessments and having those moments where you really bring out the best in a leader and you help them to understand where they've been and what is blocking them from where they want to go.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And Diana, you were talking earlier too about kind of psychological safety because nobody nobody really wants to have these conversations. They're not easy. Nobody likes to introspect. It's 2024. I mean, we're the year of AI. I heard the most dangerous thing you can do with AI today is if you've got the paid GPT that knows you, you can ask it to roast you. Apparently, it's really painful. So proceed with caution. But Diana, how do you how do you think about the psychological safety?
Yeah, psychological safety it's one of those phrases where you'll often find people rolling their eyes. And I think that's unfortunate because psychological safety is necessary, especially when you're in a startup, because psychological safety creates that space where you can make mistakes. You can try, experiment, share their learnings, and continue to improve. And that,
And if I could, I mean, if you're a
yeah,
startup, that's number
totally.
one. You got to be that. You have to be that, right?
And that's exactly. And that's why I think it's so important for startups to be aware of how do you create that space. And it isn't something that just magically happens. It is something where you have to be focused. You have to be aware of the impact you're having on others. And again, how you respond, how you show up will inform whether people feel safe to try, to experiment, to grow versus just stay in a really safe lane because they don't want to be made to feel incompetent or lack of intelligence because there's a reaction that the executive had when something went an unexpected way.
Right.
Can I add something? Just there, I mean, this is true of probably all humans, but especially entrepreneurs, we wear a lot of masks. And so it's, and you're pitching to investors and you're looking like the perfect picture of a founder and a business. And so it's really important to then like bring the humanity back and lead. There is strength and vulnerability. If you can take that mask off with your team and role model that and show people you're still strong and like bring them into that process, it gives them permission to do it as well. It humanizes you, the leader. It brings the team together. And so I think that actually is like an undercurrent of psychological safety. There are a lot of people that are afraid of showing themselves. fully because we're all acting how we should be, and we're all human. So just let's get over it. Let our humans show. But that's something I see all the time with like as a barrier for leaders, specifically entrepreneurs, trying to bring about that culture of psychological safety is like, I want it for them, but that I can't do that.
That's great.
I
So
love that.
Monica, how do you know if you're a good leader? Like what's somebody buys you the coaching package, maybe that's a sign that you're not a great leader, but how do you know if you are a good leader?
Well, my just intuitive is a good leader is obviously, I say that so flippant, but followable, right? If the mission and the results and you're able to keep that vision and keep dignity for yourself and employees, most of the leaders that I work with, their biggest strike against their leadership is the inner critic that lives in them that robs them of dignity. And so then that's what usually ends up causing them some leadership problems. So I think the more that a person is self-aware and has that inner resilience and it can model change, can model how to transition through change, um, and the honesty factor. I mean, we live in a world where gaslighting, manipulation, and deception are so common, and we see this rise in narcissism. And so I think the more that we can see leaders who are not enmeshed with their teams, where they stop with themselves and they're just they're a part of a team, but they're not, whatever the team doesn't represent them as a human. I mean, there's so many complexities there. But we go back to
You're
Peter
talking
Drucker.
about separating yourself from the business in terms of your self-worth, dignity, and
Yeah,
value. Is that
even the team. So I work with a lot of narcissism and codependency, which sounds weird that that would find its way into businesses, but you would be shocked how many businesses in their leadership teams have these. There's a book called The Human Magnet Syndrome, where a codependent leader is drawn to a narcissistic leader. And so we have some enmeshment going on where the leaders look at each other as they reflect, you now reflect me because we're in this together. And so they then transfer that inner critic, and we have emotional abuse happening with leaders. And so, I mean, I can't tell you how it looks like marriage therapy, but I can't tell you how many clients that I've done a version of marriage therapy with partners that have been so deeply enmeshed that it's caused leadership problems. So that's a whole nother show and a whole nother, but yeah. So
Yeah.
authenticity. I always go back to authenticity.
And I love that because oftentimes a leader will mirror a prior leader that they had. And that isn't necessarily the right approach. For example, there's always the story that you hear where, a coach or a consultant walks into an organization and the executive is screaming. And you ask, why are you screaming? And you basically drill down and find out that's how their prior executive or leader managed the company or managed the team. So we get into these patterns of mirroring situations and people that we've experienced before. And that isn't authentic, but it also may not be right. And so part of being a good leader is, as we've said, is showing up as you are, but also continually looking for ways to be better. And that is through observing the engagement from your company. Are people, going back to psychological safety, are people comfortable to speak up? Are people comfortable to make mistakes? Are people comfortable to counter you? Because if you put yourself up on this pedestal and don't allow people's voices to get to you, you're living in a silo. You're living in a space that's constrained. And if you can open up and really become a leader who individuals feel they can talk to, they can contribute, then you're going to have a broader range of perspectives. And ultimately, you'll become a better person and your company will benefit as well.
great? Ari, I want to ask you kind of, again, kind of being in, I think that what we're hearing is intentionality, being intentional about your culture, about your leadership styles, and not just accepting who you are and what you are as a status is maybe a good value of a coach. But how do you foster the right culture that aligns with your leadership and goals? How do you think about that, especially as you're sort of transitioning from the first few founders of a company up to a team that's growing much larger? Some of our companies have just 2 people in them. And some companies have, they're up 20, 30 employees and growing. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, I love the question. I think so few of us, as humans and then as leaders, it's really important to clarify what your personal values are, to take stock, take inventory, and sometimes those can change with time too. So knowing that and getting really clear on what are the must-haves and the deal breakers. And when you're building your company, I do see a big shift when there's like single to 3-person teams to like even 10 in culture, 10 to 30, 30 to 100, like that. It starts to shift. And what you need at the early stages is different because you've got to let go. Like you've got to start planting the seeds, empowering other leaders around you, and culture's dynamic. So you've got to have trust in those leaders that with their influence, culture will change a little bit, right? And so people talk about, I think as you grow, a really important thing that gets overlooked is like people look for culture fit, aligning to values, all of that. But I think you need to like zoom out and intentionally look for and like culture enrichment, I will call it, where it's like, okay, let's not have groupthink. Like, here's where our strengths are. Like, where we're wearing blinders in some areas. How do we bring people in with a different perspective that actually still align to this higher purpose, with these values, but they have a completely different worldview? That will strengthen the culture as you grow, and it'll also make you more able to adapt and innovate and respond to what the current world is needing.
Diana, there's always fads in entrepreneurship. It used to be like, don't sleep, right? And then we learned, hey, that's actually bad for you in many ways. So it used to be like a badge of honor, like, oh, I only slept 2 hours last night, but now we don't love that. Uh, but I think today it's kind of like we've got this founder mode, right? So like that's the new fad right now. So do you have any thoughts on sort of the current cultural norms and how they fit into leadership styles?
Yeah, to expand on the founder mode, Paul Graham wrote an article recently about founder mode versus manager mode. And what he was talking about was companies tend to do better. That was his perception when the founder is there, when the founder is the one guiding the company, setting the vision, the direction, the culture. He said when the founder brings in managers, that culture, that energy is lost. The manager will, try to put things into a framework or into a process. They'll take away that ethos, that energy that the founder brought. And that is something that, people are talking about here in Silicon Valley. But what I found fascinating is the alternative viewpoints that arose around that founder discussion, in that a founder can be an amazing force, an amazing amount of energy and define the culture, but it gets to a point where they're spread too thin. And that's, partly, the success of a company as you grow and scale. So there becomes a point where having others come in, having other executives who can provide an extension of that founder is really valuable, because it allows the founder to shift from being tactical to being strategic, to define the next, 3 to 5 years of the company in some way, shape, or form. And so founder mode, I think, is really amazing when you're at a very small scale. But as soon as you grow, there's that benefit and that value of bringing in others so you as a founder can remain present, but also ensure through managers and through others that what you created continues to be what brings people on, as well as retains them in the company.
Cool. And Monica, you talked about Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy. Can you dive into that? What does that mean? What does culture eats strategy mean?
Well, it's interesting because I work in this field a lot with this issue, and it is where you can have a team member that really disrupts the mission. And this is where we talk about narcissism again, which I look like I'm obsessed with this, but this has actually found me. I did not go out searching to say I want to master narcissism. But when you've got a team member that is triangulating, right, making the culture look like the show Survivor, and there's these little pockets of division going on, it reduces productivity. And then what ends up happening that we know is people leave places of employment because of the culture, right? They get to a place where it's toxic. You know, you hear that a lot. The culture got toxic. So how do we help leaders discern um, who is disrupting culture? What's the policies or formula, or what are they going to put together to be able to say this is what we do when we feel like we have a culture disruptor? Um, and what are those next steps, and working with HRs to do that effectively. But I truly believe that the research really points in a direction, just like family dynamics. I mean, for me, it's always amazing how we bring family dynamics to work. So, you know, you've got the enabler, the black sheep, you've got these roles, and they come to work. And so being able to dissect and to help bring a culture where it's psychologically safe, which, you know, going back to some of Diana's, it's psychologically safe to be there. And then also that the culture is that mission driven or vision driven, and that you get people going in the same direction, even with all the diversity that comes to the table.
You know, when I had my company, I remember when I started, I was like, startup companies fail for a million reasons, right? They fail all the time and for so many reasons. And I was like, if the technology doesn't work, that's okay, right? If the product doesn't work, that's okay. If it's a failure of like timing, that's also okay. These are things that aren't really in my control. But I was like, whatever happens, it is unacceptable for my company to fail because of culture, infighting, politics, like any of that stuff. That's not acceptable. That's not going to happen. So I work very hard to do that. And I think that's another great reason to invest in a coach, because it is the dumbest reason for a company to fail. It's so preventable, and doing it right brings so many benefits. So I really value that. We got about 10 minutes left, and I wanted to kind of switch over to sort of the founder mentality, and how founders can kind of like manage them, self-regulate, manage, and tools and resources for them. So, um, in terms of becoming a key element to becoming a good leader, having you know I don't know what to call it, baby mentality, throwing fits, tantrums, when you don't get your way. Probably not the most optimal environment people want to be in, or to provide the independence that you need in your team to thrive. So how do you manage stress and anxiety that comes with leaderships? I mean, you're fundraising, you aren't making payroll, you just dropped a big customer, all these things. You got a board meeting coming up, you've got all these challenges. It's super hard. So what can a founder do in these times of uncertainty and anxiety to sort of manage? And Monica, maybe you're a great one to kick this one off.
Well, first of all, there's a huge correlation between founders of startups, and I don't know if you've heard of the ACEs score, so adverse childhood experiences. So it really highlights childhood trauma. Well, there's a correlation between higher ACE scores, meaning that they've had childhood trauma, end up becoming founders, right? And so what I want to point out with that is not trauma and founder. I want to correlate resilience and founders. Founders are some of the most resilient people that we have in our communities. And so I think it's really important that instead of looking at their self-care and the way that they are walking out their lives, let's look at this as we are staying fit in that mode of resilience. Because the more resilient that we can keep just like a workout you would do with exercise, right? If we want to keep that resiliency up, we want to make sure that we're doing our self-care. We live in such an information age, but we don't necessarily live in an age where we would promote with a founder that you put on your calendar a time for you extracting information from your own being, and AKA journaling, right? Having some of those prompted journalings and really being able to have that self-awareness. So to me, one of the things that I think is so important for founders to recognize is that just like your physical body and working out makes you stronger, that the strength that you need to be a good founder and to be able to stay in the game long term and not suffer from burnout or physically, you can disrupt your relationships, disrupt your health, disrupt your finances. How do we stop that? Is we're preventative by doing workouts. And so whether you have a coach that is helping you put together those workouts, whether you go out and you're exploring that, whatever your regimen is for self-care and for the personal growth. And that is so key because you are the product as a founder. So find support.
And I love that. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. If you want to
No,
add. Yeah.
I love that framing because oftentimes a founder feels like they're alone. And I mean that in a way that probably is a positive intention, that they don't want to put more on their team. They don't want to burden others with how they're feeling or thinking. But I would flip that and say the more you're transparent, I mean, maybe with your exec team, maybe broader, it will depend on the company and the individuals. But the more you realize that the people you've hired, the people who you've brought in, who are working with you, can also be a part of your support network. They can help you scale. They can take away some of the pressures. So to realize that you're not alone, there are other people who you can lean on, and they're probably going to be so excited about the opportunity to help you. And so to get over that, I have to do it all on my own, and realize that distribution of responsibility is empowering and can also free you up to be more of yourself.
So that actually ties into a question from our cohort, which is how do you motivate team members to take ownership of their roles and responsibilities? You kind of just said you should do it, but what are strategies a good leader can do to sort of help transition some of those things and create that right culture of ownership and responsibility?
Yeah. And I go back to, that authenticity that we've talked about, providing clear expectations, giving someone context, but also the piece that's often forgotten is that trust, that when you give someone an opportunity, trust them to see it through. And that doesn't mean that they go vanish down a hole and come back 3 months later, but it means that you've agreed on how the updates will be provided, when they'll be provided, and they support that situation instead of just micromanaging or getting into an emotional way that constrains what the person can do. And so that trust, again, to reiterate, is extremely important. That providing of an opportunity for people to grow and develop is extremely important. And I'm also going to take it steps earlier. You can hire for it, because if you hire people that are just amazing at their craft, but complete assholes, that's going to have a ripple effect across your organization. So if you hire for people who think beyond themselves, who think of the whole, then there's a higher likelihood you're going to have people who really are excited and want to step up and help you, which is consequently helping the company.
The old NA rule. It's a good one.
Yep.
Can I add something that kind of ties the previous question and this one together? I mentioned like the foundation and the scaffolding. I've really, after following like flow science for decades, I've doubled down on it. And there's a lot of really good, if you can integrate some of the flow principles, it really helps to buffer against burnout. It is resilience building, but there are also some really good clues in there, because for motivating your people and your team. So like one of the best flow triggers is this challenge skills balance. So that's something like ensuring that the skill level of the person matches the level of challenge, because if the skills are low, challenge is high, they shoot right up to anxiety. The opposite end is boredom and apathy. And so there's that, but then there's the intrinsic motivators that if you can kind of weave these in, really dig in with your individual performers and team members you're depending on. So curiosity, passion, these build upon each other, purpose. Passion leads to purpose. Once they've kind of found like bumping up around purpose, they want the autonomy. That's the next piece to go expand in that and then develop mastery. So if you can see how there's an area, like find out what the individual team members care about, how that connect the dots for them and ask them how it fits to the larger mission, and let them have a little bit of autonomy to build that out. And then give them real feedback, like have those feedback loops. So that would be one like tactical thing to try to build in.
That's great. Monica, we only have a few minutes left, but one thing we talked about before the call was it's very, very common for most founders to have some form of imposter syndrome, right? Like, why am I here? I'm not the right person. I'm not the experienced. Blah 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 blah. What do you have to say to them about sort of like imposter syndrome?
Well, first of all, I would love to say if you are struggling with imposter syndrome, most likely you are a high achiever. So that's what the research says. That's where the vocabulary for imposter syndrome came from. Two Ivy League psychology professors were noticing that these high achieving women had this intense fear of being found out that they didn't really deserve to be at their Ivy League school. And so when we kind of dive into that a little bit more, it is a sign that you have a desire to know more, that you want to perform, you're wanting to stay at that high achievement. Now, there are some factors that actually cause you to feel like you don't know enough or that you're not good enough. And a lot of those do go back to family background or environmental failures or even previous bad bosses that have just taken nicks out of your self-regard, right? So a lot of times we have to go in and create our own internal structure for self-regard so that then you can start to build yourself from the inside out. So there's lots of remedies for imposter syndrome. But let me first just let you know that if you have it, take a deep breath and smile because you are among the high achievers most likely.
I love that framing because you often hear there's no such thing as imposter syndrome because in a sense we all feel that way if we are perfectionists or high achievers. But I also think it's very important to acknowledge it because it's often an indication of you're pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, which is a good thing. It's an opportunity for growth. And so I know it may sound counterintuitive, but I often coach people to accept their imposter syndrome and to actually listen to it because it's identifying areas where you may need to learn more. You may need to get more feedback. You may need just to listen to yourself and ask yourself, where is this coming from? What is the trigger? And to be able to acknowledge it, but then to work through it by going back to your support network, going back to the people that you brought into the company, but also just being thankful that you're pushing yourself to be better or to explore something new. And that's uncomfortable, but it's definitely a sign, at least in my opinion, of a good leader.
All right. Well, we'll wrap there for our live stream. So thank you, Ari, Monica, and Diana for sharing your thoughts here. But stick around. We'll continue with the closed door session here in just a moment.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Such a good conversation.
Yeah, so fun. I'm really enjoying your answers, ladies.